Well, welcome everyone. I'm Rena Weissman, and this is SF in SF, Science Fiction in San Francisco. And we should add in the American Bookbinders Museum, our lovely home for a year and a half now. Yay! Very excited about that. Speaking of other guests, next month we will be hosting Ellen Klages for her new book from Tachyon Publications, yay, our sponsor, called Wicked Wonders. We will have David D. Levine, who was supposed to come last year, was not able to because of family issues. Sadly, his wife passed away and was sick for a long time, and we all miss her. Kate Ewell, she was great. He will be here with Arabella of Mars, and its sequel, which I do not know the title of yet, is due out in July, so you'll have to keep an eye out for that. And we also will have another debut novelist, Robin Bennis, who is a local author with a really fun female swashbuckling pirate airship extravaganza. It's terrific. I just finished the arc last week. Then in June, we will have author Steve Boyette and his writing partner, Keith McCronsky, I think is his name, with a book that they have co-written together. And then in July, we'll be having Curtis Chen, who wrote a fabulous novel called Waypoint Kangaroo, and the sequel is coming out, which was really, really fun science fiction. And Megan O'Keefe, and it means it's another debut novel drink night. So, and then future guests we have lined up. We have Daryl Gregory. We have Lisa Mason, who has not been on the writing scene for a while, but did some fabulous time travel stories, novels, The Golden 90s, Summer of Love, really two of the best time travel books out there. She's a wonderful novelist. She's getting back into the field, and we're delighted that she's agreed to come out and be with us. And then we'll have a few more surprises for the fall, so of course you'll stay tuned. And you can do that through our website, which is sfinsf.org, and you can just go to the website and sign up through the link in the left sidebar. And again, I'll be sending out that information through our newsletter, so sign up online at our website.
So here we are. About professional science fiction, it's kind of what we are. We get some debut novelists in. Debut means maybe. But anyway, it's always been my pleasure as an old journeyman in the science fiction field just to play a role in welcoming my colleagues. And tonight is especially warm and wonderful for me because these are two of they're not debut novelists. We've been around. They've been around. They're professionals in the field for quite a while, and people that I know and my colleagues that I've known and worked with and respected for years. So anyway, let's get to it. We're going to have two readings, then we take a break and misbehave for a moment, and then we come back, and then we talk about literature, and mostly we talk about movies because that's what writers talk about. Madeline Robbins, originally a New Yorker. I knew her as a New Yorker. She's been just about everything in the business. She's a Regency novelist. She's written a New York Times notable, what would you call Stone Wars? It's a
dark fantasy.
Sort of a dark fantasy.
Blow up your hometown.
She was the founder of a little group called the Book Cafe, or what the hell is it called? Bookview Cafe, and she writes a series of sort of Regency mysteries called the Sarah Tolerance novels. She's been working in the field for a long time with some success, but I hear tonight, she tells me tonight she's going to read a piece from a new novel that is not part of any of that, and I'll leave that to her. And I want to welcome Madeline, and here she is.
Thank you.
This comes under the rubric of, now for something entirely different. I have been working on a fourth Sarah Tolerance novel, and then I got this opening line, and kind of went with it. So now I'm working on 2 novels at the same time, which is, I actually think, categorically insane. But even dead, my father took up all the air in the room. I wandered from one parlor to the other, exchanging a few words with people who wanted to make me feel better but knew they could not. Pats on the shoulder, sincere gazes held just a second too long, wringing of hands and shaking of heads, all the wordless ways humans try to handle death. I did not make it any easier for them, wandering through the party the way I did. At least Madeline sat in one place. A portrait of my father sat on an easel in the hallway, overseeing the festivities. He would have loved it. I inherited his chin, his brown eyes, his dark, wavy hair. I had not inherited his brilliance in public situations, his ability to put strangers at ease, to draw people to him. The things I wanted to say, I knew I could not. I might be the only person at the wake who knew my father's feet of clay up close and personal, but even bad daughter shows some respect. Aunt Rose found me. Her nose twitched as if she'd been sniffing me out. "Isn't it time you said something, Ivy?" At no time had anyone, Laurel or Rose or Iris or Lily, told me I'd have to say something. The aunts had arranged the funeral and the wake while I took a bus to a train to an airport, trying to get back to San Francisco. They had made a point of telling me everything they planned, just as they had made a point of leaving Madeline out of the arrangements. The poor thing is distraught. It wouldn't be a kindness to ask her to make decisions. Rose shot a quick look at my stepmother, huddled in the red wing chair with the claw feet, flanked by Aunt Iris and Aunt Laurel. When my father was alive, she had shone almost as bright as he did, beautiful and entertaining and warm. Now she was sunken and drab and looked as if she were under house arrest. I wouldn't ask it of her. And she's not really family, dear. Now it's very simple. You thank people for coming. You tell them, you say... She stopped as if she'd run out of words. "Go," she said at last, and gave me a little shove toward the center of the parlor. Behind me, I heard a spoon against a glass, the universal attention-getting pleas for a certain kind of gathering. Everyone looked at me. "Thank you for coming," I said. My voice sounded feeble. Aunt Lil, stationed by the sideboard, cutting game pie, looked up and smiled at me. "Thank you for coming," I said again. "It means a lot to me and to Madeline." I felt the focus of the crowd shift to my stepmother, then back to me. "I know it would have meant the world to my father. Your regard..." I could feel myself running down, unaccustomed as I am to public speaking. "I don't think he could have accomplished the things he did without the support of his friends and community. Thank you." I started to step back into the crowd, then had a moment of inspiration. "If anyone wants to share a memory of my father, please." I made a shooing motion, as if I could drive people into the center of the room. After a moment, someone stepped forward and began to speak. I didn't listen. I'd outed myself as Hart Western's daughter, and the press of people around me doubled as I drifted toward the other parlor. Everyone wants to get their condolences in while the condoling is good, I thought. "I'm so sorry. He'll be greatly missed. A truly great man." My father would have loved it. I never met anyone so comfortable in the spotlight. Expansive, witty, polite, solicitous. "You must be so sad. He lived a wonderful life. Such a great loss to us all. I'll never forget him." My feet hurt. I wanted a drink and something to eat. I kept smiling with half my heart and half my face, wondering how long this would go on. In the other parlor, the fulsome testimonials continued. "You must be so relieved." My head came up so fast I almost hit the speaker's chin. Who says a thing like that at a funeral? Yet this man was looking at me with sympathy. Hart Western, alive, was an overwhelming presence. I imagine you find it easier to breathe now. He was tall, skinny, too young to be my father's contemporary. He wore casual clothes, soft as if they'd been worn to velvet. A blue work shirt, black jeans, a tweed jacket with elbow patches. Elbow patches? His dark hair needed cutting. the very model of a graduate teaching assistant come to pay his respects to a teacher he didn't much like. It's an interesting mix of people. He gestured toward a group of my father's students who stood at the sideboard, blinking like newborn kittens. The clueless, the thankless, a nod to the crowd generally, and the heartless. This time he nodded in the direction of Madeline and my aunts and a group of people who were clustered together beyond the wing chair. I hadn't noticed that before, that so many of the people who had introduced themselves as my father's colleagues had crowded to that side of the party. In a group, there was something unsettlingly groomed about them, even my aunts. They wore black the way people do at funerals and movies. Looking at them, I was surprised Aunt Iris hadn't put Madeline in a black crepe veil. The heartless? I echoed. Certainly. His gaze was fixed on them. He was a head taller than me, olive-complected and dark-eyed. I felt his height like a shadowed wall. When he moved, the tweed jacket gave off an outdoorsy scent, wood smoke and pine and must. Do they look like they've got a heart between them? I gave it more thought than the question really deserved. They look brittle. An excellent word. Well done. He looked delighted. Well, some of them do. Not my aunts or Melisande, but some of the others. That was a lie. Melisande looked so brittle she might snap in a stiff breeze, and my aunts, in a block, they were formidable, not fragile, but unbending. You're retreating on me, he sighed. I thought he was going to turn away, and just then, for whatever reason, I couldn't bear it. I turned toward him and offered my hand, trying for some of my father's social ease. I'm sorry, I'm Ivy Western, and you are? John Ash. He didn't shake my hand. He took it in his own and turned it palm up as if he were going to read my fortune. His fingers were very long and strong, and his fingertips were smooth. It was unnerving. I pulled my hand away. How did you know my father? John Ash smiled again. We were colleagues. At the college? No. He didn't shake his head, which made the words seem oddly abrupt. His focus was still on the people across the room, the ones he'd characterized as heartless. But all of them had been introduced as my father's colleagues, too. Ash didn't look like one of them. Psychologist or philosopher? Neither. He kept gazing, not staring, gazing across the room. Then, so suddenly it startled me, he turned his focus back to me. Have you eaten anything today? No. What? You need to eat something. You're pale. I'm always pale. Come on. He took my hand again, led me toward the sideboard. I pulled back. Please, no. I'll eat something later. I should be mingling. Amusement lit his eyes. Ah, well. Go. But don't forget to breathe. I walked away. Aunt Lily was instantly at my side. Who was that? Her tone invited me to provide swoony confidences. Of all my aunts, Lily was the one who came closest to the sympathetic, jolly, confiding person an aunt is supposed to be. It didn't come naturally to her, but I gave her points for trying. His name is John Ash. I didn't want to talk about him. Aunt Lily pursed her lips. She had beautifully curved, full lips that looked like they belonged to an Edwardian pin-up girl, not a woman with a dark pixie cut and black horn-rimmed glasses. John Ash. He's another of my father's colleagues. Did he say so? I wonder where from. Lily took my arm. You've been standing up since the party began. Sit down and we'll have a cup of tea. Tea? By choice, Aunt Lily never drank anything but water or bourbon. Never drunk, never even tipsy, but I'd never seen her drink tea. I let her steer me toward one of the side chairs against the wall just behind the piano. The cushion was rock hard, but it did feel good to be off my feet. Rest a bit, sweetheart. This is harder than you know. I closed my eyes and leaned back against the rounded, unyielding cushion, listening to the rattle of a china cup and saucer being set down on the table next to me. I heard the rise and fall of voices, like tides across the room. I thought, perhaps if I fall asleep when I wake up, everyone will be gone. But I couldn't sleep. The chair was far too uncomfortable, and it wasn't safe. I opened my eyes. Wasn't safe? In my father's parlor, surrounded by his friends and family and students and colleagues. Not safe? A couple of students wearing chinos and corduroy jackets when they would have been happier in denim. approached me to say goodbye. I rose to meet them, playing my part. A great teacher, brilliant man. We were lucky to have him. Sorry for your loss. I shook hands with the president of the college, with the members of the psych department, administrators, distraught students, our neighbors, a reporter from the Chronicle who'd done a piece on my father a few years ago. After a while, when the parlors were half emptied, Melusine got up shakily from the wing chair and went upstairs, Aunt Iris hovering. Only the heartless, as John Ash had called them, remained. Why didn't those people leave? The party was clearly over. The catered food had been cleared away. Even the bartender was idle. He stood with his hands in his pocket, half a bottle of red and a quarter bottle of white open on the table before him. Aunt Rose was in consultation with one of the heartless men, both of them looking grim. I hoped she was telling him it was time to go, but instead, at his gesture, the black-clad people began moving in twos and threes into the far parlor. Aunt Rose followed them, closing the pocket doors behind her. A creak from the stairway made me look up. Aunt Iris was coming downstairs at a clip unbecoming to a woman of her size and dignity. Aunt? My voice sounded loud in the empty parlor, but watery, as if it weren't transmitted by air but some other medium. Aunt Iris stopped on the fifth step up, startled. Ivy, my dear, I thought you'd gone to your room. That was Melusine, Aunt. You went with her. But you must be exhausted. She came down the last few steps and toward me, hand outstretched. Come on, sweetheart, why don't you go upstairs and I'll bring you something to eat. I'll bring you some tea. At the word exhausted, my eyes were gritty and I wanted to slump to the ground where I stood. Lying down sounded terrific. My aunt's eyes flicked sideways toward the closed door on the far front parlor, reminding me, who are those people? Iris blinked a couple of times and she looked back at the near parlor. Those people? Sweetheart, that's just a little meeting of the members of your father's institute. They're talking about what to do now. Do now. So that was where the colleagues came from, members of the monthly drinks and discussion group my father had gathered around him, grandly called the Underwood Philos Institute. They have to meet here today. It was convenient. Some of the members came from rather far away. I thought the Institute met once a month. Why couldn't they meet until the next meeting? Sweetheart, the Institute was very important to your father, and we need to honor his memory by... She cast another anxious look toward the pocket door, as if the parlor were a ship that might sail without her. Maybe I should make an appearance, I suggested. A knot of contrariness was forming inside me. My father always said I should come for one of their meetings. Not this meeting, Ivy. Everyone's in shock from Hart's death. Next time we meet, I'll bring you myself. Now, are you hungry? There's still a lot of food in the kitchen, dear. I didn't see you take a bite all afternoon. No, I'm fine. Go meet with the colleagues. I meant it to be funny, but it came out sullen. Aunt Iris watched me with a tuck of concern between her eyes. I put a finger up to smooth it away. I'm good. Really, Iris. Go. I might have crashed that meeting to annoy my father, but I didn't want to hurt my aunts. I turned back to the parlor I'd come from and took a glass of wine from the bartender's table. It occurred to me that I should check on my stepmother. I started up the stairs, suddenly tired again, fighting gravity. What a weird day. Antsy to exhausted, dutiful to rude. Maybe this is the way one is supposed to feel at a parent's funeral? My mother died when I was too small to remember her. I had no comparison data. I leaned heavily on the banister and counted the stair treads as I climbed, the way I did when I was a kid. Something moved in the shadows on the landing. Jesus! I lurched backward, almost lost my balance. John Ash stepped toward me from behind a bookcase. I thought you'd gone. Oh, that sounds cordial. Ash shook his head. I wanted to see what happened next. He was not apologizing. You'd have thought that lurking in the shadows of a stranger's house was, outside of spy thrillers and serial killer TV, perfectly normal. So what happened? Ash sat down on the landing, folding his knees up to slide his feet between the balusters. He rested his chin on his knees and looked at the floor next to him. After a moment, I sat down beside him, sliding my feet, then my knees, between the balusters. Even with the rail between me and the drop, I felt a pang of height sickness. Did something happen? I asked again. People said goodbye. Your stepmother was bundled out of the way. One of your father's sisters brought you a cup of tea. Did you drink any, by the way? I shook my head. Good. Then all the people from the Institute went off behind closed doors and shut you out. I looked at him sharply. It was one thing for me to feel shut out. It was a sensation I knew intimately, distilled essence of being Hart Western's daughter. But to have a stranger use the words made it real. I was used to people telling me I was overreacting, too sensitive, that I resented Melisand's place in my father's life or his mentorship of his students or whatever. I didn't want to intrude, I said. Lame. John Ash smiled. Even if that were true, you should want to be there. You should be there. You cannot expect a legacy if you don't claim it. Excuse me? I'd stopped feeling height sick. The reading of the will is Tuesday. There are things that cannot be conveyed through the devices of the law. What was the word he edited out? You have a place in that room. They cannot dispute it. What if I don't want a place in that room? My father and his damned institute, why do you call him that? My father. Not father or dad or pop or papa or daddy. He never wanted me to use those terms. He wanted me to call him Hart. Look, can you be a little less oracular and a little more straightforward? Ash snorted. I'm sorry, it's a habit that's hard to break. I'm not feeling great. I hate parties almost as much as I hate people dropping vague hints. What do you mean, my inheritance? I wasn't expecting much, but I hoped I'd have enough money to finish my degree and hold me over until I had a job. I wanted the stuff I considered mine, the books in my old room, my stuff stored in the attic. That was it. I was fond of the big old house, the way you are when it's the only home you've known, but I didn't want the responsibility of it. Melisande should have it, or the aunts. John Ash was speaking. I'm sorry, back up, I didn't hear you. He started again. Some inheritances you receive at birth. You get your father's eyes and your mother's mouth. Some inheritances are conveyed through courts and papers. And some inheritances must be earned, even fought for. Fought for? All I could think of was King Lear or East of Eden. But I'm sounding oracular again. The thing is, I cannot tell you. You must find it yourself. Find what? My inheritance? Right. Where? You might start by joining the meeting downstairs. The Institute? A thought occurred to me. Why aren't you in there? Aren't you one of my father's colleagues? John Ash leaned forward and rested his head against the balusters. I'm from another branch of the discipline, you might say, a different institute. I would not be welcome. But I would be? You are within your rights to be there. They will be discussing property of yours and whether it should be disposed of. How do you know this? The customs are not so different on my side of the discipline. Go down. He turned to face me, his unkempt hair shadowing his face. Go. Can you come with me? Ash shook his head. All I saw was his hair stirring against the balusters. I would not be welcome, he said. They were not pleased that I was here, those who saw me. I would do more harm than help. And you won't tell me what I'm walking into, a state dinner, a black mass? Your sense of humor will be an asset. Ash smiled as if I had proposed a meeting of the Legion of Superheroes. If anything, I imagine it would be more like a papal election. I snorted. And what happens if I ignore them downstairs? I lose my shot at the papacy? Not utterly. He was serious now. But you make your challenge more difficult. That settled it. I was not interested in more challenges. I'll pass. I have a dissertation to finish. That's challenge enough. Whatever my aunts and the colleagues are divvying up, I'm sure I can do without it. Don't be glib. His wide, mobile mouth straightened into a line that made him suddenly formidable. Has it occurred to you to wonder why your aunts don't want you in that room? Why they have tried all afternoon to distract you, keep you from asking questions, encouraged you to doze and withdraw, and show yourself to your worst advantage? I meant to tell him he didn't know what he was talking about. Then I remembered Aunt Lily's insistence that I sit and rest, Rose's pushing me to make a speech, and Iris talking me out of my curiosity about the meeting downstairs. I rocked back and drew my legs from between the balusters, knocking one of my shoes off. It fell to the hall floor with an echoing thwack that made my stomach flutter. "You're going." If Ash was pleased, he did not show it. The man could play poker with the devil. I suppose so. I got to my feet and kicked off my other shoe. I didn't doubt that Aunt Iris, the oldest and most reserved of the aunts, would be distressed if I showed up shoeless. But I was pretty sure that only a bit of reckless abandon would carry me through disobeying the aunt's specific orders. No, they hadn't ordered me to stay away precisely, but they had urged it, for my own good, for the sake of the members of the Institute, for the sake of my father's memory. I looked down. My father's portrait, still on the easel, seemed to watch the closed pocket door to the far parlor. He was everywhere here, in the hall where his hat still hung on the bentwood coat rack, in the carpet under my bare feet, which smelled of his pipe. I felt suddenly drunk with his presence and angry. The anger took me down the stairs. Each step I felt heavier with fury until the treads bowed beneath my feet. Just before I reached the hall landing, I stopped and took a long cleansing breath, like in yoga class. From the corner of my eye, I caught motion above me. John Ash nodded slowly, encouragingly. I turned my back on my father's portrait, turned toward the parlor, and put my hand on the recessed brass fitting that would let me slide the door open. I felt a shock of electricity, then I pushed.
All right. More later on that.
That was great. I can see why the first sentence made you want to just keep writing.
Yeah.
All right, we have another reader. Let me see if I can remember her name. Yes, it's Pat Murphy. Pat's made a pretty significant mark on the field with The Fallen Women and The City Not Long After, and some other books that I'm not familiar with, but maybe we'll talk about them later. Pat has also affected the field in sort of an activist, semi-activist way as one of the founders of the Tiptree Award. She was one of what they were called the Brazen Hussies at one point. She has been a voice for feminism and for women writers in science fiction, and she's also one of the most distinguished of the bunch. And I'm not sure what she's planning to read right now, but it's a new short story, I believe.
New short story.
All right, why don't you just do it?
Okay, I'm going to read you a new short story that it's funny. Everything I write is not like anything else I've ever written. It's sort of like, you're supposed to write in a genre so that your work is familiar, but this is very different from other things I've written. It is inspired, you might say, by the political climate of the times. The title is Motherhood, and you are listening in on half of a telephone call. You're basically half of a telephone call. Oh. You're overhearing one half of the call. So here we go. Hello, Senator. Thank you for returning my call. I'm so glad to speak to you at last. Yes, I did say in my message that this is a matter of life or death. It is, absolutely. Oh, no, you misunderstand, sir. It's not your life that's threatened. It's the life of a child. Life of your unborn child, in fact. First, congratulations are in order. I understand that Julia Banks, your former intern, informed you that she's pregnant. I believe that was just over a month ago. She's just entering the second trimester. "Oh no, there's no doubt that you are the father of the unborn child. We ran a paternity test and..." "Who gave me the right?" "Well, actually, sir, you did. Surely you recall the Father's Rights Act, the bill you introduced a decade ago when you were in the Oklahoma State Legislature? That act requires medical personnel to run a paternity test whenever any mother-to-be is seeking medical assistance for a difficult pregnancy. The law requires medical personnel to locate the father and obtain permission for any procedure that endangers the life of the unborn child." You do remember that, don't you? "I'm guessing you haven't been in touch with Julia since she left D.C. She's been staying at her mother's house in Oklahoma, and she's experiencing uncontrolled eclampsia, a threat to her life and to the life of the child. So when she sought medical assistance, the legal requirement was very clear." How did we get your genetic information? Well, from your medical records, of course. You see, Julia lost her medical insurance when she left her internship position. She's making use of the Oklahoma Fund for Unwed Mothers, a form of welfare. And since she's a pregnant welfare recipient, Oklahoma law requires medical personnel to locate the father. That requirement grants them access to all relevant medical records. That was in an addendum to the Father's Rights Act, I believe. Now that we've established that you are the father, I am required by law to inform you of the responsibilities placed on you by the Sanctity of Motherhood Act. I know you're familiar with this law. You sponsored it in your second year in the Senate, as I recall. And you gave such eloquent speeches in defense of it. Your words about motherhood and the sanctity of life were quite moving. Julia's eclampsia threatens the life of your unborn child. If the baby remains in Julia's womb, the chances that it will survive are very low. That diagnosis triggered a clause in the Sanctity of Motherhood Act. If a woman is unable to carry a baby to term, the nearest relative capable of carrying the child must do so. After all, advances in medical technology have made it possible to transplant a viable fetus to another mother. This operation can preserve the life of the unborn. I remember your speech about this clause. You predicted it would result in many joyous births. So we've been searching for the nearest relative capable of carrying the child to term. Julia has no siblings. Her father is dead. Her mother is elderly and frail. So you, Senator, are the child's nearest relative capable of carrying the unborn baby to term. Calm down, Senator. I know this is a surprise. Take a moment to let it sink in. Back when you were advocating for the Sanctity of Motherhood Act, some accused you of attacking women's health, of waging war on women. But I thought your speeches made your position very clear. You were celebrating motherhood. It just seemed like you were singling out women. That was because only women could be mothers. Fortunately, modern medicine has changed all that. Now you can be a mother. Don't hang up, Senator. You really need to hear me out. You'll regret it if you don't. Take a deep breath. I realize this is big news. I'm sure you want to know how this miracle is possible. You probably don't follow every advance in obstetrics and gynecology. In recent years, a great deal of effort has been made to expand the pool of potential mothers. Some of us in the field of reproductive health have had a special interest in this area. I mean, why should the sacred privilege of motherhood be limited to women? The procedure is really quite simple. First, we will give you a uterus, a transplant from a healthy donor, and then we will transplant the fetus and placenta. It's a process that has been thoroughly tested and recently, very recently, approved by the AMA. So you will have the opportunity to experience the joy of pregnancy. Quite possibly the trickiest part is getting used to the hormones. They can be a wild ride, even if you've been a woman from birth. And I'll admit that being pregnant does take a toll on a mother, but don't worry, clinic personnel will be with you every step of the way. We'll make sure you take the proper precautions to protect the child. No drinking, of course. No drugs. We'll monitor your diet. You will gain weight. 20 to 35 pounds would be appropriate for a person your size. There will be a lot for you to get used to. You'll need to rearrange your work schedule and plan for the birth. If you choose to breastfeed, well, all of that is covered in this booklet we've written for expecting fathers. There's no need to take that tone, Senator. No, I am not crazy. The law requires you to accept this responsibility, and given that you were one of the bill's sponsors, I thought you would accept it joyously. This is a rare opportunity. Excuse me? You think I'm enjoying this? Well, yes, I am. Over the years, I've noted the zeal with which you defend the rights of the unborn. I'm so pleased that I can give you the opportunity to truly share in the responsibility of motherhood and the joy of birth. Oh, you are quite right. No one can force you to undergo this procedure. You can decline. But if you choose to abdicate your responsibility, you will be held liable for the murder of your own child. Yes, murder. Yes, that's in the law. If the prospective mother declines, yes, Senator, you are the prospective mother. I realize you did not ask for this responsibility. Throughout history, this responsibility has been thrust upon people. They did not expect a condom to break or an IUD to fail. I understand your confusion, since all of those people were women, up until now. But things have changed. So I'd recommend accepting your responsibility, sir. No, Senator, you really don't have a choice. I had my usual workshop group read that story, and one of them said, "I used to think you were a nice person." Male.
So let's take 5 minutes and then we'll unfold this, both these stories, okay? Just get another beer, I'm gonna get one. Very short break. We had a very interesting reading series.
Fathers seem to be a thing tonight.
The SF and SF podcast is sponsored by Tachyon Press, the American Bookbinders Museum, and SomaFM, listener-supported commercial-free internet radio with over 35 channels of really interesting music to pick from. Check it out at somafm.com.
So, I'm going to start out with you guys. Does anybody have a question directed to either one of our writers? Because I'll do it otherwise, but...
When are you going to finish the book?
I have this little museum to run.
Stop. We all donate money by drinking heavily. The museum runs
It's a plan. All right, you drink, I'll write. I'm working on it.
We can do that. We can sit here drinking and you sit there watching.
I'll get the kid to bring my laptop. I'll just stay here. I can sleep in my jammies. As soon as I can. I want to finish the Sarah Tolerance number 4
Number
first.
4, which is, what's the title of it?
At the moment, the title of it, which I'm not in love with, is The Fate of Women. It's the Sarah Tolerance series, for people who don't know, is essentially sort of Sam Spade in the Regency with a female detective who is a fallen woman. And so the first one was essentially mapped on the Maltese Falcon. This one, someone comes to her and complains because there is a guy named Marvel who is doing retired whores out of their savings. And this is a slightly alternate English history. So it, being a fallen woman, it has certain kinds of protections and legal standings that they didn't in the actual Regency. So I'm working on that one. I need to finish that, and then I can get back to Ivy.
So you had Point of Honor.
Point of Honor, Petty Treason, The Sleeping Partner.
The Sleeping Partner, okay. I was just thinking how You do the fallen woman, and she is the falling woman.
Oh my God.
Yeah, they're just,
There you have it.
Dropping
nobody
like
can keep on their
flies.
feet. Yeah, it's very sad.
So does the new book have a title?
This one?
Yeah.
No. This one has a barely imagined ending and a whole magic system I have to work out, and stuff.
But it's awesome.
Yeah. Right?
Yeah.
Hi there. I've got really a two-part question for Madeline. With writing two books at once, I'm interested to know how you do that, whether you have to separate time and write one per day or you can do it together, and if you ever find that the books bleed into each other, so you find that a description you've written for one props up in the other.
Wow. How do I find time? Very badly. Very often I come home from my day job and all I want to do is make noises like an overheated car and have a glass of wine and talk to the dog. So finding actual writing time is difficult. At the moment, I'm trying to focus more on the Sarah Tolerance book. The voices are really different. The opening line of the first Sarah Tolerance book is, "It is a truth universally acknowledged that a fallen woman of good family must soon or late descend to whoredom." And so I keep up that sort of, it's not quite Regency and it's not quite forsoothly, but it has a certain formality to it, whereas Ivy sounds like me, more or less. So that they're pretty, also one is San Francisco now and the other is England in 1811, so it's a little easier to keep. The undergarments are different.
Well, so the funeral is modern day San Francisco. Yeah. Interesting.
I had forgotten until my daughter, who just ran out to do other things, kind of reminded me that that first line came to me shortly after my father's memorial party. My father had left excruciatingly detailed instructions for his party. My father loved throwing parties. He never met a party he didn't want to be the focus of attention on. And so he had left us with the name of the pilot who was supposed to fly overhead and distribute his ashes over his favorite piece of real estate on his former home, and the Dixieland Jazz Band that was to play us down mournfully to the river and joyfully back up again.
Was this in New York? Where was this?
This was in the Berkshires in Massachusetts.
Oh, right.
They would have, I don't think they would have allowed a distribution of ashes over the Hudson, though it might have been interesting. And it was a great memorial, and to some extent, having to plan a party like that, it takes some of the edge off. He was also 98 when he died, so it wasn't like he had been cut down in his prime. But he loved parties, he loved being the center of attention, so there's a little bit of my father in this book. My father, however, was a much nicer guy than her father. But you didn't hear that from me. But Pat's fathers seem to have been something of a thematic.
Yeah, it's a theme. We did not plan that.
No.
Now,
Well-
did you get the jazz band and the pilot?
Oh,
And
God, yes.
Absolutely. And
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I would not have gone against my father's will. He would have come back and punished me.
Really.
Also, it was fun. I mean, really.
No, it actually sounds great to have it all planned for you.
Well, I mean-
you know what you're supposed to do.
And we invited everybody in the known universe, and there was a huge amount of food. And I think a good memorial should be at least 50% roast. So it kind of was.
Well, Pat, having roasted you, I have always been such a fangirl of yours. Well, I don't know how you're anyway. Which of us you're the girl, but I'm the fan. And you have always been pushing at the edges with, well, back when non-Western fantasy themes, fallen women, and I was also, mining that vein of non-Western fantasy, and you were, and Rachel in love with the ultimate love story. What can I say? Non-binary love story, and now this is once again pushing the envelope again, once again. So congratulations, keep pushing.
Thank
And
you.
that wasn't a question, but you can comment.
Yeah. Well, this story really did take me by surprise because it was purely one blast of rage, one picture of all the guys in a room making decisions about what women can do too many, one too many. A lot of the state legislatures have been real hotbeds of, yeah, exactly. So, yeah, this was, I don't normally write things that are quite so filled with rage.
And topical.
And topical.
Yeah.
But,
But it's such polite rage.
It is, well, and I realized writing this, I don't know if anyone remembers my story, A Flock of Lawn Flamingos with Joan Egypt. This character is Joan Egypt. I mean, it isn't, but it's the same, like, let me see how I can, just turn things around on the person who is trying to turn things around on me.
Well, the other thing sort of interesting to me was that's a very old, not a literary form, but in country music, there's a form called the telephone talking song. And
Operator, can you help me? Yeah.
it's not even that, it's like, hello, darling. Yes, it's me. You remember me. And then it goes on a one-sided conversation, and they're usually...
Oh, now, honey, don't be like that.
yeah. So it's an old, very familiar form that's used in country music about usually about a broken love affair.
Well, I was trying to when I wrote it, it all came from her point of view, and clearly he was just interrupting and sputtering and saying things. I didn't need to write his part. But it seemed to me that there was that I was modeling this on an old science fiction story that had that same one-sided conversation, but I can't remember what it was.
Well,
so if
it's
anyone
been used
can.
in the epistolary
There was a
novels.
recent film. Does anyone remember?
Yeah, I remember.
It's a man It's a man driving on a highway in Britain to welcome the birth of his child, and he's talking to, and then complications ensue. But it's all him. It's all him talking on the car phone.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a form that came into being with the telephone because it obviously worked. Yeah, please.
Well, but then that's a more modern version of what we were talking about, which is the story or novel that's all correspondence, all letters.
It's like an epistolary novel only.
We talk about that at dinner, so very topical again.
That story made me so happy, Pat. My question is it coming out anywhere soon?
I haven't sent. I just finished it a couple of weeks ago, so I haven't sent it anywhere yet.
It's been a couple of weeks.
Yeah, I got my workshop group to read it, and it's like at that fine tweaking stage. But I'll get it out in the next week, I think, and we'll see.
Well, it's only peripherally science fiction where you have the operation with the.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But
Eileen Gunn said it was science fiction satire,
well, it
which
is
I
that.
liked.
But it
I
could
liked
also,
that.
it could also go in the New Yorker or Salon or
Oh, true.
anything, because it's not very long either. Was it a couple of thousand words?
It's just over 1,000.
Yeah.
Flash fiction.
Yeah.
I wouldn't call that flash fiction, but who knows?
Yeah, it's short.
Yeah.
I don't know. How do you define flash fiction?
Depends on the editor.
The one?
Depends on the editor.
100 words to 2,000 words, depends on the editor.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it was, you know, to me the interesting thing. Well, a couple of things. One is, as a native Kentuckian, I'm always glad to see Oklahoma taking the heat. Because you know, Oklahoma has become the West Virginia of states. It's their own fault.
Oh, I'm glad to offer that.
And the other thing, I've been working on the Babel stories actually recently. For trying to write a book of, I have grandchildren, about 5 or 6. I'm trying to write Babel stories for kids.
Oh, they'll be interesting.
Well, no, I'm not changing them. But I think that kids, they should know the Babel story. They should know. But anyway, the funny, and this is sort of an aside, but all the stuff about the murder of the fetus and that it's murder if you get this is not based on the Bible. In the Bible, life begins with the first breath. God breathed the breath into the clay that he formed. That's the breath is the first. So it's birth is the beginning of life. And this whole idea of the as soon as you have fertilization of a fetus, fertilization of an egg, you have a human life. This is not biblical, so anyway.
Well, not only that, there's a verse in the Bible saying that if a child is conceived under some inappropriate method, they actually advise you to give them such and such an herb to.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's in there somewhere.
Huh. Well, anyway, that's modern politics, so what can we do? The other thing, I was just talking to Madeline, who was one of the things I love about Madeline's writing and the precision of it, it reminds me of that, who was the famous critic at Columbia who wrote defined the novel as being about manners, morals, and money? Who was that?
Supposedly, Jane Austen said, "I write of love and money. What else is there?"
Yeah.
But
but this is a more modern 50s thing. But that's the thing that I love about listening to a piece of that is the precision of the manners of how people set things down and pick them up and and I think that's your fascination in this kind of fiction, and you do it so well. I love the way it's, I love the precision of it.
well, I'm always fascinated in the things that signal.
Right.
Ideally, manners should be a way of getting through the world without doing harm. Very often they are used as a weapon, sort of weaponized behavior.
It can be either way, yeah.
But I'm fascinated with the way behavior betrays just a huge realm of things, class and money and background of all sorts. And Chaz is waving his hand.
I need to point out that Michel Lamont wrote a book called Money, Morals and Manners, The Culture of the French and the American Upper Middle Classes, if that's what you were after.
All right. Cool. Well, but there's a delight, clearly a delight in writing not about who shot who or who ran out of the room, but who picked up the glass. And there's a pleasure in that kind of precision in literature that you deliver. So I like that.
I think one of the things is I had an alcoholic parent, and when you have a parent, when you're a kid and one of your parents is often unreliable, you start looking at essentially the semiotics of behavior. What does this mean? And so I tend to do that in my writing is, okay, what is the way I pick up this bottle mean? Does this mean I'm in trouble? Does this mean I'm in for a good time? That sort of thing. And I don't think I started doing it consciously. As a matter of fact, this may be the first time I've ever actually put that into words, but I think it's very much a part of the way that I navigate through the world.
Now,
I really love that that there's something wonderful about the secret society sort of books where there's a secret that you should have known, and there it is, and you gradually unpack it. And I can't wait to see what your magic system is that you have to invent. I'm sure you can't wait to see it
She's
either.
going to find out that a lot of work has gone into keeping this from her, given that it's all happening in the same house that she grew up in.
well, that's where this becomes not a regency. This is. I mean, I even noticed the sentence about halfway through. There's a place where there's a hinge in this story. It's something moved in the shadows on the balcony, and that was Mr. What's
John
his
Ash,
name?
yeah.
Yeah. So he's moving it. So clearly, something else is starting to happen. There was a hinge in the story. I like that.
Jazz.
Jazz.
Yeah, sorry. So if you haven't invented the magic system yet, are you expecting to invent the magic system to confirm the story that you already have? Or will the magic system, once invented, define the story that you then write?
Yes.
As a girl.
I know that this is a system that is split across gender. The males have one set of abilities, the women have another set of abilities. This grew out of a planned novel that was never written with a friend of mine, Mumble, years ago, which was supposed to be set in Tudor England. And when I had this idea, I called him up and said, "Do you mind if I borrow this?" He said, No, go ahead. So I'm running with it. But I knew about what the men could do. I had to figure out how the women did what they did. And I think I've got that worked out. But it's still, I don't think it's fair to just sort of just say, magic, and then head for the hills. I think there has to be some sort of, if you dig a ditch, you need to have a shovel or a spade or something like that. If you're going to work magic, there needs to be some structure to the actual process, whether it's a recipe for baking bread or it's a hoe or what have you. And I'm finding it out.
No, that's, I agree. Chaz, you might, do you know there's a British writer, one of your colleagues probably, Simon Ing, do you know his work?
Yeah, I know Simon.
Well, he did a great story one time about cannibalism, where there was a whole ritual, there was a whole thing involved in it. You didn't just do it. It was like careful recipes and dinner parties and silverware and the whole thing. I can't remember the name of it. It's a brilliant, brilliant story.
We have phones for this purpose.
All right, but anyway, there's magic has to have, it has to have a lot of more logic than anything else. I mean, you don't have to explain logically why an airplane flies from Oakland to New York, but you have to, if you're going to do it magically, you have to spend some time explaining it.
This is what's annoying about fantasy. It looks so easy because, you just make it all up. And then you go, oh, damn, I have to make it all up. And it has to be consistent.
It has to have logic? That's
Yeah.
so fair.
Every time I'll write something like a novel that has a lot of like The Falling Woman, which was built on Mayan culture and had a ton of Mayan.
Okay,
had a ton of research in it. And you do one of those and you go, man, I want to stop doing research. I'm going to do a novel where I make everything up. And then you're doing one where you make everything up and you're going, oh, God damn it. Where's I want to just go do some research. It's so much easier.
Years ago, I taught my older daughter was in a middle school in New York where they loved it if parents wanted to come in and teach a class. So I taught world building for 2 semesters, which was really fun. It's a great, middle schoolers are the perfect age for a world building class because they are moving from the concrete to the abstract. And there's always the kid who's sitting in the back of the class like, you can't make me like this. And by the end of the class, they're like, this is so cool. But the one thing I insisted was, you can have, there was a girl in one of the classes who really wanted to have a world populated by flying ponies who lived in the clouds. And I said, okay, but you have to do all the things that everybody else does in the class. If there's a mythological system, I want to know where it comes from. Where do they eat? What happens to their bodily waste? Oh my God, that one. Flying ponies don't poop.
Wow.
Then they're going to be very unhappy flying ponies. And I had this whole long list for the 12 weeks that the class lasted of each week was a different thing. Okay, mythology, geography, religion, all these things. And she thought I was so mean because all she wanted was to have flying ponies who lived in the clouds. And I said, well, what's below the clouds? I don't know. Well, but you need to know, even if it never appears in your story, you need to know what's under the clouds because that has some bearing on how the clouds. You would have thought I was the meanest person west of Central Park. She just thought I was horrible, but I was, And as the class went on, I began to be really having kind of a good time just winding her up because she was so obdurate. Everybody else in the class took this and ran with it, and she just could not. It may have been she was a little too young, a little too much on the concrete side of the divide, but...
Did you ever find out what happened to the pony poop?
No. And she got perhaps the first C in her entire academic life. Because
she wouldn't?
Because she would not do the work as she was told to do the work, and she was outraged. I said, but, I'm giving you points for trying about things, but I don't care what color tiaras the ponies wear. I need to know the things that I asked you to tell me. And so it didn't go well. And then the semester was over and we went on to other things.
Yeah. Well, but we all learned that. The first time I wrote a fantasy novel, I had big ideas of what happened. Then I realized you had to, there had,
and you pull a thread and everything sort of falls apart. You have to figure out, okay, how do I keep that from happening?
And it's not like the real world could just nod and you know what's outside the door. It does have to be specific. That's why so many people cheat and they just do the Middle Ages because So please.
Oh, I just had a teacher one time who said, people will believe the impossible, but they will not believe the improbable. And so you always have to think, oh, wait a minute. I can totally invent this, but there has to be a logic to it.
No, it's hard work. It's hard work to do a good and there's, a lot of fantasies are just pastiches of old ones because it's hard to make all that stuff up.
I will say that if you nod at the blatant improbability, you can get a lot farther. One of my favorite things ever in the history of ever, the old TV show Lois and Clark. There's an episode where a guy from the future comes back and causes terrible things to happen. And at one point, he turns to Lois Lane and says, you go down as the most stupendously stupid woman ever in the galaxy in all time. And she is naturally affronted by this. And he says, hello, I'm Clark Kent. Hello, I'm Superman. Hello, I'm Clark Kent. And she's like, what? And then later in the show, and this is even my more favorite thing in the history of ever, he's been captured and he's about to be sent back to the future. And he says, can I ask you one question? And Superman says, sure. And he says, look, you are Superman. You're the most powerful man in the galaxy, if not in the entire universe. Why the red cape and the blue underwear? and really, man. And he pulls himself up to his full 6'40" height and says, my mother made it for me. You cannot argue with that, you know? Okay, Mom made me the suit, and fine. And from that point on, you don't care. They've acknowledged that it's ridiculous. They've put their hand on it and said, I bless this, go on to other things. And so I try to remember when I'm working with the improbable and the impossible, if you say, yeah, this is impossible, work with me here. Readers really often will do that. They will say, oh, okay, sure, I'll give you that one.
And they recognized that he had a mother.
Yes.
That he loved it.
Yes, well, she was very lovely. As I remember, the scene was when she makes him the costume at the beginning of the thing, and he's looking at it like really much. They won't be looking at your face. Ma? Really?
I have to ask you, I mean, you've read a lot of, the Regency, all the historical detail. Is it a relief when you finally are writing in a contemporary world and you can just go, okay, I don't have to worry about researching the underwear. I know the underwear.
Well, at this point, I know the Regency underwear pretty well. I was working on a thing set in the Restoration era, and there I really didn't know the underwear, and I had to do a lot of very fast research. It's different.
For people who aren't aware of this sort of thing that happens in novels, you're writing along in a scene, and then all of a sudden, someone is getting undressed, and you have to know what underwear they're wearing, and you're just going, oh crap! I have to spend an hour doing underwear research.
What did a quartern loaf of bread cost?
Yeah.
How much would he be paying for this? Oh my God! You can lose. I lost days trying to find out what one peasant would call another in medieval Italy, because signore means my lord. So two peasants do not call each other my lord. If they walk into each other and it's not a bar, what do they call each other? Dude. I finally said, ho, brother, or something forsoothly like that, or I may have written around it, but I asked a couple of scholars of Italian history, and they're like, in that way that scholars of Italian history do. And apparently, because so much of what they know comes from either clerical writing or the writing of the upper classes, it's not like they had Chaucer chronicling things. It's really hard to figure out what the peasants are calling each other. So I fudged something, because you do.
Marron was a common. Marron. Was a
Paisan.
Dude. No, it's amazing how you're writing along and then you go, it's like hitting a wall or something. You're going, oh no.
I can't go any farther.
Did he tie his shoes? Yeah. Did they have Velcro? Are they magnetic shoes? They're just part of his feet. There are no shoes. Everyone goes barefoot. All right. I used to get stuck on, and then how are they going to get across town? Are they going to take a bus? Are they going to take a cab? Are they going to walk? Are there flitters? God help us, flitters. Jetpacks. And then I learned what Karen might be about to say. You don't have them go across town. You just say, on the other side of town.
Yes.
What I was going to share was what I found in all my friends in the SCA who do costuming, the hardest question that they have not really found a satisfactory answer to is, what did women use as underwear? Men, they know. Women, they don't know. They can't find any examples.
Really?
It also, because then you also get into class and period and a whole bundle of things. When I was working on this restoration thing, I was surprised to learn the lack of privacy that the king and queen had. You not only went to the bathroom in full view of at least one or two attendants, but they were the ones who did the wiping. And this was already a very good job. You wanted to be a lady of the chambermaid because it gave you all sorts of political power.
With what?
I have not stumbled over that particular piece of information. Not poison ivy leaves.
Coming back to the how do you get across town thing. See, when I was writing contemporary crime, I knew how you got from Newcastle to Carlisle, by train, by road, by bus. I knew them all. I was suddenly writing medieval Crusader fantasy. And how far can 8 strong men carry one teenage girl in a litter across a semi-desert landscape in a day? It's a question. Blessedly, we have the internet, and even more blessedly, we have the SCA and other historical recreationists, because I just sort of put this question out there. I have no idea. And suddenly there were 8 strong farmers building a litter, tossing a daughter into it and carrying it around a field for an hour and then multiplying up. It's magic. We think 15 miles is entirely reasonable. 20 is possibly pushing it.
Well, it's also, I have friends
did it
who...
experimentally. That's so great.
That's fabulous. I have friends who inveigh bitterly because they are horse people. I am not a horse people. Yes. About the modern use of the horse by writers as a sort of motorcycle, where you hop on your horse and 90 miles later you get off and neither you nor the horse thinks any better of it. Like, okay, I'm not a horse person, but I know better than that, and I am as relentlessly urban a human as you're going to get. But it's like the stew pot that appears in every medieval thing. There's a wonderful book, the name of which I am spacing, about food in medieval England. And they go into what the constituent of the stew pot would be, or what the constituent of a pot would be, yes.
Do you mean food in England?
Yes, food. Yes, and she gives you a diagram. And the pot does not have stew in it. Stew is wasteful. What the pot has, it has layers of different things cooking at different times. And maybe there's a spit with a joint of meat on it, but you're not, just to have a pot full of meat with liquid in it is wasteful. Stew is the tail end of stuff that you can cook long enough that...
It's the leftovers.
It's the leftovers. It's not... So this idea that every inn has a big pot of stew is a cheat, I think is the technical term. So it's, horses, the stew pot and horses as motorcycles.
Yep.
I have a background in musicology and ethnomusicology, and one of the things, and I did early music, and one of the things we learned is that all we really know, scholarly sense, about early music was written by monks, who were the only people who could write, and all they cared about was church music for the most part. And the only popular music we have is church songs set to popular music, or things like the Carmina Burana, which is why it's so unique, is it's secular music. And so if you go to your medieval inn and you want to know what kind of music and what kind of instruments or singing or whatever, there's nothing written down. The authors can, the good news is the authors can make it up. Because the bad news is because we don't know. Because the people who were around to write it down didn't care. They knew, but they didn't care.
Please.
In Diane Duane's delightful book, The Rough Guide to Fantasyland, she skewers most of these... Diana Wynne Jones, I'm sorry. Sorry to both Dianas. Anyway, she skewers all of these lazy fantasy tropes, and it's a wonderful read. I highly recommend it.
Huh. What's the name of that book?
The Rough Guide to Fantasyland.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I've heard of it. I've never read it. Yeah.
Though rough would work.
Oh, they wouldn't? That's mean.
They should have published.
Oh, God, yes.
Yeah.
They missed a bet there.
Now, back to literature for a minute. You've written quite a few regencies. Are you going to continue to write regencies? You've worked out how to do it. Does it still interest you?
I love the era. I stopped writing Regency romances after 5 because the problem with a novel that is basically just a romance is you know where you're going. And having to keep two people apart for 200 pages and then let them come concussively together at the end begins to get boring. But I love, the Regency is a fabulous era because everything is happening. It is a sort of turning point. You've got the Enlightenment is giving way to a much more sort of emotionally vivid and sometimes harebrained period. You've got the Romantics coming in. You've got a growth of religion that is sort of the sort of personal experience of God type thing. You've got all the politics in the world. You've got Napoleon, you've got England. It's fabulous. Also, I like the clothes. I was approached about writing something in the, it's not really the late Regency. After George III dies and his son becomes king, then it's the George IV era, the 1820s. And I find that I don't like that period. It's not as interesting to me. And it's only like a 10-year difference. But, so yeah, I like the Regency. I think it's a really rich time to play with. And because it's such a crux, such a turning point, you can do all sorts of weird things.
Well, and the fact that it's actually a genre means that a lot of other writers have made the same determination, that there's something kind of special about this period that works. Yeah. It's sort of like the Western in the U.S., which is all based on between 1860 and 1880 or so, something like that. There was one period that where it all kind of worked. And
a 10-year difference, the 50s to the 60s.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Now, what about you? What are you doing?
What am I doing? Well, every time I try to tell someone what I'm doing, it turns out to be a lie. So,
what's your latest lie?
Lie to us.
I have told people that I am working on a novel that is based on Peter Pan. And that's, I've long been fascinated by Peter Pan, and the character who fascinates me the most is Mrs. Darling. Because from Mrs. Darling's point of view, it's a child abduction story. Her children have been kidnapped. And at that point in time in England, if you had a major crime committed, who would you get to solve it?
Oh,
Sherlock
God.
Holmes. And no one knows this but me, but Mrs. Darling is Watson's niece. And she doesn't much like Sherlock. I mean, because he's an asshole. But anyway, so that is the novel that I've got the first third of it written, and I've been playing with it. I realized that I wasn't quite telling the story I wanted to tell. But there's so many things about the story that fascinate me. It turns out Mrs. Darling and Captain Hook have history. And there are some really good sword fights. But, and there's also, this was at a time when women were being locked up for hysteria. And so there's lots of layers I want to play with, and so like I said, I've written the first third, and then I realized I wasn't quite doing everything I wanted to do, so I'm rewriting the first third from a different point of view, and so that's one thing I'm working on. But
that's a great idea.
I know. Jean Kamal has been saying I made the mistake of reading a dinner party with Sherlock Holmes and Mrs. Darling, and Jean Kamal was at the reading, and she keeps going, "Send me the book, send me the book." It's like, well, I haven't written it. Well, you've written the first third you said you had, send it to me, but I'm rewriting it. No, send it to me. So I've learned to be a little more cautious. And then I'm working on short stories. Short stories, they're lovely because you write them and then they're done. And then you send them away. And then they ask you questions and stuff.
And you get $125?
You get $125 and you
we can eat
buy
tonight.
dinner.
Wow. There's a real kind of fascination with working with somebody else's literary property, which I almost never do.
It's really entertaining. Well, Sherlock Holmes is so much fun because he's just deducing right and left, and it's like the stretches of logic in it are there. Yeah.
We do have a comment from the back.
It's just that when Pat said that Mrs. Darling was Watson's niece, I immediately saw the word niece in quotation marks. And so I would love to see you kind of throw that in there too.
Oh, dear Lord. I have a short story that I have almost completed, which is basically a Henry Higgins pastiche.
Oh, yeah, that one's...
and the very end of it doesn't quite work, but basically Higgins approaches Rossum of Karel Čapek's RUR and asks him to build him a robot which he can then teach to learn to speak as a sort of promotional exercise. But if you build a robot that is complex enough to actually learn to speak as opposed to parroting things, you're building a robot that's complex enough to do a whole lot of other stuff. And so Higgins sort of bites off more robot than he can handle. And as I say, I have no idea where I'm going to sell this damn thing if I ever get the ending right, but...
Now, it's really fun playing with other people's stuff.
Yeah.
It really is.
You never thought of that, did you? It's close to being fan fiction, but it's out of copyright.
Yep.
So but everybody's working outside of science fiction. Is anybody doing that sort of piracy and looting in the science fiction field, I wonder? I mean, everybody does it with ideas. We've all done it for years, but with actual characters, I don't know.
Oh, God.
Rena.
Terry, are you talking about like mainstream writers seizing their moment in the sun by way of science fiction?
Well, mainstream or not mainstream, yeah.
Well, I'd like to point out Tachyon has a really wonderful anthology called Invaders, which is based on that premise, that it's mainstream writers who have always been lured to the dark side and have tried their hand at speculative fiction, regardless of what their agents tell them. But a lot of it is very surprisingly successful, and Invaders kind of looks at that.
What's it called? Invaders?
Invaders.
Oh, I get it. Okay.
What's the tagline?
22 stories from the outer limits of literature.
Yeah.
Now,
Just a shameless plug.
who put this together?
Mr. Jacob Weissman.
Oh, you did. So, what are some examples?
Juno Diaz is in the book.
Oh, wow.
Stephen Milhauser. A lot of very well-known, very talented writers.
Well, Michael Chabon, I'm sure.
No, he's a little hard to contract with, but but yeah, those sort of writers.
And is this already out?
It's been out for a few months. Yeah. It's we'll bring copies next time.
I was thinking when Madeline was reading her story, you could do a whole, a theme anthology on funerals. You could do a whole story, a whole thing on funerals. I can't think of any, but they'd have to be written to order. I don't think there's been too many. I love the way that the idea of a novel starting out at a funeral is sort of, it kind of makes sense, but it also kind of makes sense as a whole short story. You can learn somebody's whole life between the. Anyway, that's maybe Peter Beagle can do that one for you, or John Kessel.
Well, funerals are one of those sort of weird things where you're supposed to be saying nothing but nice things about the former human. And in fact, a lot of what you may remember about the person who's died is funny and revealing and sometimes not entirely to their credit. And it can be told with love, but it doesn't make it necessarily a love fest. So I think that to some extent funerals are a great sort of, there's a tension built into it. There are the people who, don't want you to say mean things about the deceased, and then there are the people who are like, oh yeah, I remember Harry and I used to go to the bar every Friday night and he'd pinch the waitresses, and Harry's sister is sitting there going, don't say things like that, oh my God.
Any other, please.
Using manners and politeness as either a weapon or a good thing. And then Jacob talked about his book, The Invaders. In actual fact, on this planet, the conquering groups of people have used their idea of what's good and what's bad and completely displaced a culture that was already there by labeling their habits as bad and making them buy into it over several generations. And I haven't seen anything written about that kind of thing, really, or even talked about. And we do it in this country, too. So I was just wondering what you thought about it. Thank you.
There's an out-of-print novel by Mick Farron called Protectorate, which is about alien invaders doing exactly that. And there's one set of invaders that has instilled its cultural values on humans for most of the book, and another set of invaders comes and wants to instill their cultural values if they win, and that's what it's about.
That's interesting. I just, the workshop that I'm in, Dan Marcus is one of the other writers, and he wrote a story, we just workshopped a story that relates to what you're talking about. He was it starts out like a big bug science fiction story. The humans have landed on this planet and then have been enslaved by the dominant race, which is giant insects, which have made them into slaves. And it's horrible to be a human there. And human artificial intelligence, human-made artificial intelligence lands from the far future. I won't tell you what happens, but it touches exactly on the point you're making, that viewed from, whose culture are you viewing this from? Are you viewing it from your culture or from the culture of the species that was already there, or from the culture? And it's a little bit like history is written by the victors. It's like, whose history are you writing here? Whose manners are you believing in? Are you supporting? But yeah, that's a really interesting point, and interesting to think about more science fiction that carries that filter, that acknowledges that filter.
Please.
Well, and in addition to all that, I would think that the conquered people after a while become the lower class, and so what's considered good manners is the behavior that's behavior that's appropriate to your class, which would be subservient if you're a member of the lower class, and so on and so on.
There's a sequence in Shogun, which is not a conquered class, but here's a guy, and we're asked to believe, because he's from England, he's like all civilized and stuff, and he kills a pheasant and insists on hanging it up, because you hang up your meat until the feathers drop off, and then you know it's properly aged. And the people in the village are horrified by this, because this is not what the Japanese do, and it smells, and they have no precedent for this. And so eventually, one of the lowest of the low kills, or throws out the pheasant, and then offers himself to be killed, because he has offended the guest by getting rid of this smelly bird but he's also taken on the burden of taking care of the rest of the village by getting rid of the smelly bird. And it's this lovely clash of manners where he thinks he's going to have a dinner party and everybody's going to love it, and everybody else is just horrified by this weird barbarian behavior. And I side with the nice people in the Japanese village because ew. But I like that kind of, it's harder to write a story of the sort you're talking about, which is very, very much the déclassé behavior is the behavior of the conquered people, but the kind of cultural clash is, I think, much more familiar to us, where two people each are trying to behave in what they consider to be a civilized manner and are just horrifying each other.
And he does commit harakiri.
Yeah.
No, as I recall, a samurai beheads him.
I think
not
some.
worthy of doing seppuku.
Right. It's been eons since I read that, but that's one of the sequences that I remember very clearly just because of the cultural pull and push.
And then Anjin-san is horrified that they would do this.
Yeah. And I think part of what happens is ultimately he begins to realize that he's the responsible party.
He caused this to happen.
Yeah, he was not playing by the local rules.
Thank you all. If nobody's got...
The SF&SF podcast was produced by Maren McDonnell, recorded and engineered by Rusty Hodge. Thanks for listening.